In the village of Obodo, where the sun burned fiercely in the dry season and the rain's arrival was eagerly awaited, there lived a girl named Adora. Her beauty was as pure as the early morning dew, her smile as radiant as the sun at noon. But her father, Matsio Keke, a man whose pride was as tall as the Irako tree and whose heart was as hard as a dried coconut, believed his name and reputation could withstand any storm, even the whispers of the gods. Matsio Keke was a revered man in the village, his words held weight, and his actions were watched closely by everyone. His compound stood at the heart of the village, the courtyard always buzzing with visitors, and his house, made of sun-baked clay, was a symbol of his prosperity. His pride in his lineage ran deep, and he would often remind those around him that no one in Obodo had the honor of carrying his bloodline without the proper respect. He had always been a man of order, whose rule was respected by his children and the villagers alike. But when the news came that Adora, his 16-year-old daughter, was carrying a child without a husband, the village square buzzed with gossip. The women whispered behind their woven baskets, the children snickered under the shade of the Irako tree, and the elders shook their heads with disapproval. Matsio Keke's pride was wounded. To him, this was more than a scandal. It was an assault on his name, a humiliation too great to bear. In a fury, Matsio Keke confronted Adora in the middle of the compound. His voice thundered like a storm as he pointed at the gate, his face twisted in anger. "You have brought a dark cloud over my compound," he roared. "Go and find the man who planted this seed, for you no longer have a father here." Adora, her eyes wide with shock, could barely find her voice as tears began to fall. Her father, the one man she thought would always protect her, had cast her out like an unwanted stone. With a heart broken by betrayal, she fled from her father's compound, seeking solace and protection from those she believed would understand. She turned first to Auntie Ifioma, the woman who had promised to always be there for her. But as soon as Adora arrived at her aunt's door, she was met with cold rejection. "My husband will not allow a spoiled girl under this roof," Auntie Ifioma hissed through the slats of the wooden window. "Go, Adora. You are no longer my concern." With her heart heavy, Adora then turned to Chika, her best friend, the one person who had shared every secret with her since childhood. But Chika, too, turned her back. "My father says if I speak to you, I will never find a suitor." "Go, Adora. Your shadow is too heavy for me to carry," Chika said, her voice laced with shame. For 3 days and 3 nights, Adora wandered the village. The market women mocked her as she passed, their pointed fingers and harsh words like thorns in her side. The whispers followed her everywhere. "See the fruit of a wayward tree," they would say, laughing behind her back. Adora's world, once full of light, now felt dark and oppressive, and the weight of the village's judgment crushed her spirit. Exhausted and hungry, she collapsed on a wooden bench in the deserted market square, the moon rising high above her as her thoughts became muddled with despair. It was then that she felt a soft touch on her shoulder. Looking up, she saw an old woman, Mama Nkechi, whose skin was wrinkled with age, her hair as white as the moonlight above. Mama Nkechi had long been forgotten by the village, living on the outskirts, her name whispered only in hushed tones. Her hut, though humble, was surrounded by a small garden of yams, bananas, and herbs. She was known as the Lonely One, but Adora saw something different in her eyes, a deep well of wisdom and compassion. "The market is no place for a mother to sleep," Mama Nkechi whispered, her voice gentle and kind. With steady hands, she helped Adora to her feet and led her to her humble home, where the scent of roasting yams filled the air and the warmth of the fire soothed Adora's tired bones. That night, as the fire crackled, Mama Nkechi shared her own sorrow. She spoke of her late husband, who had been taken by the great river, and of her daughter, who had died while bringing a child into the world. "I have known loss," Mama Nkechi said, her voice soft with pain. "People call me the Lonely One, but I was once a mother. I lost everything, and yet, here you are, bringing light back into my life." Adora, filled with gratitude, listened intently as Mama Nkechi spoke. She learned of the old woman's struggles, her strength in the face of unimaginable loss, and her ability to create a life from the dust that others had abandoned. Mama Nkechi did not pity Adora. Instead, she offered her a place of safety, a home where love and compassion replaced the judgment of the world. The next morning, despite her growing belly, Adora worked alongside Mama Nkechi, sweeping the compound, gathering firewood, and helping with chores. "You must rest, my daughter," Mama Nkechi urged, concerned for Adora's condition. "No, Mama," Adora replied, her eyes alight with a new fire. "You gave me a roof when my own father gave me the road. I will work for our bread." Together, they tilled the earth in Mama Nkechi's small plot of sandy, poor soil, and though the land was not rich, it yielded a small harvest. They began trading bananas at the village junction, selling their wares to the travelers passing through. Slowly, as the villagers in the center of Obodo continued to gossip, Adora and Mama Nkechi built a life of peace and prosperity. They were not rich in wealth, but they were rich in something far more valuable: the bond they shared. As Adora's belly grew, so did her strength. She had learned that blood did not always make a family, but kindness and shared hardships created a bond that no force could break. She became a mother, not just to her son, Chidibem, but to the earth that nourished them, to the community that slowly began to see her for who she truly was. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the earth, Mama Nkechi sat Adora down. "My daughter," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and concern, "you are strong, but you are not without your burdens. Who is the father of your child? Who is the man who left you to walk this path alone?" Adora took a deep breath, the fire's smoke curling around her like a protective shroud. She gazed out at the horizon, where the last light of day met the darkening sky. "His name was Obi," she whispered. "He was a hunter from the village beyond the hills. We were to meet at the great stream to tell my father of our union, but Obi never came. They found his spear near the leopard's den, but the forest had claimed the rest of him. I had no witness to our love, only the child growing inside me. When I told my father, he didn't see my grief, he only saw his wounded pride." Mama Nkechi pulled Adora into her arms, her own heart heavy with sorrow for the young girl who had lost so much. "The eyes of a proud man are too high to see the tears of his children," she murmured softly. "But the earth knows the truth, and the earth does not lie." As the months passed, Adora's son, Chidibem, was born under the stars. He was a beautiful child, with eyes as deep and dark as the forest, and a cry that echoed like the call of a warrior. Mama Nkechi named him Chidibem, "God leads me," for she knew that his arrival was no accident, that the child would be the one to lead them out of the hardships of the past. The drought that plagued the village left the wells dry and the crops withered, but Mama Nkechi's small plot of land remained green and bountiful. The bananas they sold were the sweetest in the land, and soon, travelers began to speak of the outcast queen and the wise woman of the dust. The villagers, desperate for water and food, began to turn to Mama Nkechi's compound for help. One morning, a group of villagers arrived at Mama Nkechi's gate, led by none other than Matsio Keke. His once proud figure was gaunt, his ribs visible beneath his fine tunic, and the pride that had once filled him was replaced by the hollow look of hunger. At first, he did not recognize the woman standing before him. Adora stood tall, her skin glowing with the richness of the land, her son strapped securely to her back. "We have come to buy water and fruit," Matsio Keke said, his voice cracking with desperation. "The village wells are dust." Adora, her heart heavy but steady, looked at her father. She saw not the man who had cast her out, but the man who had once been her protector, her guide. She looked past the shame and saw only the hurt in his eyes. Her voice was calm, her words strong. "The water from this well is for the thirsty," she said, "and the fruit from these trees is for the hungry. But tell me, Matsio Keke, does a dark cloud provide such sweet water? Does a spoiled girl grow such life-giving yams?" The villagers fell silent, their eyes shifting from one to the other. Matsuo Keke, his head bowed, dropped his gaze to the dusty ground beneath his feet. He realized, too late, that in guarding his hollow reputation, he had cast away the greatest treasure of his life. "I was a blind man," Matsuo Keke whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. He fell to his knees. "I threw away my greatest treasure and called it trash." Adora stepped forward, her eyes softening as she looked at her father. She did not mock him, for she had learned from Mom and Kechi that bitterness only poisons the one who carries it. She offered him a gourd of cool, clear water. "Drink, father," she said, her voice calm. "The past is a ghost, but the child on my back is the future. You may enter this compound, but you must leave your pride at the gate." From that day on, the village of Abodo learned a lesson they would never forget. They saw that a seed cast into the dust is not lost. If it is tended with kindness and courage, it will grow into a forest that can shade an entire people. Adora remained with Mama and Kechi until the old woman's final days, and together, they transformed the outskirts of the village into the most prosperous land in the region. As for Chidabem, he grew to be a leader who never pointed a finger in judgment, for he knew that the best way to see the truth in someone was to look them in the eye, not at the shadows they leave behind.